So Purim is coming right on the heels. We're filled with anticipation as the shortest and yet most euphoric of our holidays edges closer. I suggest to you that when you want to sum up Purim, it could be done so with one magic letter, that magic letter being the Hebrew letter M, which symbolizes the many obligations of the day. There is, for example, Mishloach Manot, that is the sending of food parcels to one another. There is the other main mitzvah of Matanot Le'Evyonim, which is alms for the poor. There is Mishteh, which is the party. And of course, Megillah, which is the reading of the story of Purim. And the significance of these mitzvahs are as follows. First of all, insofar as the food parcels and the alms for the poor is concerned, those were, in the first instance, a very specific directive from both Mordechai and Esther, the hero and heroine of the Purim story. And we read in the Megillah that they instructed and instituted both those ideas. Essentially, in their time, in order to enhance mutual love and respect between fellow Jews, and every bit in our time as well, we seek to do the same, always in awareness of the need to enhance unity across the world. So there is a concept of giving at least one food parcel of at least 2 items to one other person, at least one other person, and giving charity, knowing that it'll be distributed to at least 2 or more people. That's that mitzvah. Then there's the party. Party, of course, is to celebrate the victory of Purim, and more particularly to offer thanks to the divine hand, which always governs our destiny. It's the one and only time when we actually have an outright mitzvah to drink, to say l'chaim, to become somewhat inebriated. And by definition, we seek to remove the inhibitions that hold us back in life and unleash our true selves, our happier selves, our more spiritual selves. And I remember one Purim morning several years ago, I woke to go to morning service and my car windscreen is completely frozen. You know how frustrating that can be. And I opened my glove compartment to find something to de-ice it with and found a bottle of single malt there left over from the night before. So it was obvious what to do next. I poured it onto my windscreen, and needless to say, it more or less did the trick. My neighbor decided he wanted to fulfill the mitzvah to the max. He saw what I was doing, and he came running out, and he started licking the rest of my windscreen, getting all the spots I missed. Okay, that last part isn't true. But I did have a hard time explaining to my wife, who borrowed my car later, why it reeked of alcohol. I was reminded of the time that I got stopped on Purim, and the policeman said, "I'm afraid you're going to have to blow into his poop." I said, "I am okay." Go, okay, you know what? Tell you what, just slow it. I didn't want that I'm asthmatic. He said, "Then you have to get urine." I said, "You know, I'm diabetic." He said, "Okay, then you're going to have to give me blood." I said, "I can." He says, "Why not?" I said, "I'm a hemophiliac." He said, "You know what? Forget all that. Just walk in a straight line." I said, "I can." He says, "Why not?" I said, "I'm drunk." There was a mitzvah to drink, and my father, of blessed memory, always insisted, even though it's a mitzvah to drink, you don't always have to drink in order to be able to dig deep. You should be able to find that inner joy from within without recourse to external liquid. Be that as it may, of course, if one is going to drink on Purim, we do so responsibly. And once you've had your first glass, be sure to hand somebody else your car keys. The reason we read the Purim story, not once but twice, at night and again the next day, annually, is because when reflecting upon the Megillah and its plethora of fascinating commentary, one cannot help but be enthused by the profundity of the narrative. It's more than just a classic tale. It's a message for life. The many episodes that are contained therein are reflected in our daily existence, even as we too, much like the Jews then, are in a certain sense slaves to Achashverosh. That is, in the sense that we're not an independent people with our absolute own sense of liberty. We are, after all, still in exile. We are still constantly tormented. We all are still enduring anti-Semitism and terrorism and whatever else besides. We're always subject to all too frequent anti-Semitic banter and abuse. And we're always at risk of the modern-day Hamans rearing their ugly heads and posing all sorts of threats. So in that sense, we can't say that we are absolutely free. So when we read the Megillah, Again, it reminds us, it contains messages therein, not just about what happened to the Jews then, but how we can better cope in our own lives as well. Thus, the Mishnah tells us, he who reads the Megillah, that is the Purim scroll backwards, does not fulfill their obligation. By definition, at face value, if you hear the second half of the Megillah in one service, then the first half in another, so in other words, you read it backwards, you haven't fulfilled your obligation because it has to be read in sequence. But Jewish mysticism points out backwards doesn't just mean in a literal sequential context, but also in a historical context. One who reads the Megillah, that is, who thinks the Purim story is just backwards, something from a long gone past, doesn't fulfill their obligation of celebrating Purim properly. Because we have to realize that it still has every bit modern day relevance as well. The Purim story took place in Susa, which is still in present day Iran. Anyone who thinks that the threat of Jewish annihilation is something of the past is in denial. Purim reminds us again that Hamans abound in every generation, and Iran can and must never be trusted. It also reminds us that King Ahasuerus, read United Nations, EU, President Biden, whoever, cannot be trusted in regard to Jews, or more precisely, Israel either. We have our own Jewish backs to watch, and no one else will necessarily care enough to consider that. So Purim is there to remind us that Jewish pride is essential and that we shouldn't rely on anyone other than ourselves and indeed, of course, our supreme parent in heaven. And yet still, of course, we take heart when reading the Purim story and looking back to yesteryear, because the faithful Jew understands the meaning of in those days and in ours, by Yamim Hahem Bizman Haseh. Just as there was salvation in those days, so too we have faith in deliverance from our perils as well. One interesting point to consider is the fact that Rashi, the famous commentator, notes on the passage regarding Ahasuerus' inability to sleep that it was customary to read speeches before insomniac kings as a way of helping them snooze. A clear biblical precedent of sermons being an ideal prescription for sleep. That's just by the way. But of the 167 verses contained within the Megillah, there is one particular verse that always screams out to me. When Esther expresses her reluctance to go to the king, because all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces are well aware that if anyone, man or woman, approaches the king in his inner court without being summoned, there is but one law for him, and that he be put to death. That was her point. Mordecai counters, if you persist in keeping silent at a time like this, then relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from some other place. And in the meantime, who knows what will happen to you? And then he said, isn't this, after all, why providence has led you to this position of prominence? Mordecai's statement is simple. You are in a prominent position. You have a leading role. This is more than mere coincidence to benefit your personal glory. Divinity has orchestrated this role for you so that you can be of tremendous benefit to your people. Make no mistake about it. People's salvation can come from other places. God can function in an infinite number of ways. What a terrible shame, however, it would be to forgo the opportunity for which you were assigned. For me, that's one of the most classic verses in all of the Torah, in all of Tanakh. Because the messages are very clear and loud. When you find yourself in the driving seat of life, you have to seek to facilitate and work out why you are where you are and what you can do to help others in that context. If you're in the seat of being able to help other people, then you have to facilitate the needs of those people, even if that may at times involve some element of discomfort or concession on your part. Always recognize that where you are is where you are meant to be in order to make your own unique and dramatic difference to your part in your slice of your world. And finally, in regard to Purim, someone told me, I'm not celebrating Purim this year. I once enjoyed always coming to shul, listening to the story of the Megillah, but I've become skeptical after all the misery of this past year. It certainly isn't a cause for celebration. So if anyone's feeling that way, I say the following. There was a policeman sitting in his car outside a Purim party last year, hoping to really catch someone on the night. He got very excited when he saw me staggering out of the party, swaying to and fro, holding a set of keys. He fixed his eyes on me, waiting with glee. I tried one car with the keys, I tried another car with the keys, and he's delighted. It's made his wait worthwhile. Meanwhile, people are leaving the party, but this policeman, he had it prey. He's waiting to pounce. Finally, I get into my car. And then first the window wipers go on, and then the radio is blaring. More and more people are leaving the party. And finally, when all is still, I start up the engine, I start to drive. The policeman, his moment has arrived. He zooms out in front of me, and he orders me out of the car. I get out. He says, yet again, blow into this. I do. I blow into the breathalyzer. Nothing. Policeman changes it for another one. Still nothing. Says, these must be broken. You're going to have to come down to the station with me. I looked up at him and I said, you know, you're wasting your time, don't you? He looks at me. He says, why is that? I said, because I'm tonight's designated decoy. Throughout the course of Jewish history, there have been decoys of different sorts, different allures, people or situations that look to distract us from our higher calling. Nowhere was that more evident than in the Purim story, as Haman sought to have the Jewish nation abandon their faith at risk of annihilation. What's compelling is that during the entire 12 months that the threat was lingering, not one Jew capitulated. We remained firm, we remained steadfast in our commitment to our deals and our traditions, notwithstanding all the decoys and all the people and all whatever it was that tried to take us off course. This year, we're faced with an altogether different threat. And yes, it's been very difficult for every single one of us at whatever level in our own way. But is that really a reason to abandon it all? I don't blame people for being skeptical, but I do think that the Purim story in itself serves as an absolute inspiration. When Mark Twain asked the question, what is the secret of the immortality of the Jew? The answer is in the word Jew. Where does the term Jew come from? Judah. So the Hebrew for Jew, Yehudi, comes from Yehuda. And yet, if you comb through all of biblical texts, you will never find the term Yehudi used until the Purim story, where we're introduced to Mordecai, the Yehudi. Why? Because he's the first real Jew in the sense that he personifies the constant challenge of the Jew in exile as he faced, as the leader of the Jewish people then, the first real final solution that Haman was seeking to execute. Mordecai is living in the 4th century BCE, following the destruction of the First Temple. He's encountering that very first real threat of anti-Semitism. He confronts a tyranny committed to the annihilation of him and all of his people simply because they are a different nation. They have different rules. They have a higher set of standards. And yet, he doesn't kowtow to the demands of the enemy, nor does he cower in the face of any impending threat. He stands up for his principles and thereby implants that sense of pride in the hearts of the masses. And that name, Yehudi, Jew, stuck. Because for the next 2,500 years, our Jewishness is constantly tested. Under countless regimes, both friendly and hostile, we struggle with supposed friends and obvious enemies who seek to undermine our spiritual integrity. But like Mordecai, time and time again, we earn the name Jew because we actually rise to the challenge. And that certainly is an absolute right and cause for celebration. So say l'chaim, have a happy Purim, emphasis on the happy, and enjoy. And please God, just as the Jewish people experienced their salvation then, we will experience our own salvation now as well with God's help and miracles. And to that we say, Amen. Shabbat Shalom.